Hello.
Our story begins inside the flagship of the Trade Federation blockade over Naboo. It all starts with a discussion, just as the Jedi were. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan were sent by the Supreme Chancellor, Balorum, when their negotiation cruiser was detonated by weapons inside the hangar bay. The Keda Neimoidians, under the command of Viceroy Gunray, were operating a smooth system. They trapped 2 Jedi inside their vessel, trying to poison them, when one of the deck operators called out from across the room. There were proximity alerts coming just from outside the fleet. The Viceroy turned around and stepped to the edge of the bridge, looking out past his blockade, when tiny little blips appeared. Clearly they were nothing but simple gunships. He turned back, asking for identification, but nothing came through. They searched for a symbol, a signature, even a signal. Nothing was on their records. Gunray assumed immediately that these were pirates and ordered the release of the vulture droids. Just as the fighters launched from their dormant positions, another officer on deck called out. The Jedi escaped the boardroom that they were trapped inside of. Qui-Gon Jinn's emerald lightsaber showed first, slashing through the first B-1 battle droid, before the blue weapon of Obi-Wan Kenobi slammed through another. The Jedi had activated their distress signal for a fleet no one knew about. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan continued their march, slicing through the droids and moving towards the location of their hostile hosts. The Jedi were here for negotiations. Now, several innocent Republic naval militiamen were dead. They were openly attacked, and the Jedi had proof. With Obi-Wan defending his master, who began the breach into the command bridge, an assault was transpiring just outside the vessel. Obi-Wan didn't know about it. He just did what his instructor told him to do. Starfighters engaged, and the shuttles from deep space moved towards the ship with complete ease. The troopers on the inside were shaken a little due to the flag, but the heavy turbo cannons on the Lucrehulks weren't precise enough for vessels of such size. Just as the Jedi starfighters asserted their dominance over the Federation vulture droids, a fleet exited from hyperspace. Heavy ion cannons crafted by Mon Calamari technology started to unload on the flagship as the other Lucrehulks rapidly tried to move into battle positions to defend Viceroy. Inside the corridors where the 2 Jedi currently were, the ship rocked back and forth. Gunray, forgetting about the 2 Jedi outside his door, called for the Federation to send everything, cut off the support of this violent military. Just as the words left his mouth, Qui-Gon's blade started to appear through the door, and it was sealed with a reinforced protection. Qui-Gon looked at his saber from the other side, before pulling it back and twisting the weapon in deeper and shoving it forward. Obi-Wan could hear destroyers rolling through the hallways towards their position. His blade rolled to his side, into a traditional Form 4 approach, when from the location they entered, he could hear blaster fire, the hangar bay. Just beyond the door, and the wreckage of the cruiser they used to arrive, troopers filed out of their landing transports. Some wore helmets and proper armor, resembling that of the Jedi Temple Guard unit, while others were less protected and looked more like ambassadors rather than trained warriors. Vulture droids and B-1s tried to hold their own, but the combined attack of lightsabers and blasters left them unable to stop the attacking force. With the collision of a swarm of ion blasts, the shields on the flagship dropped, and the mysterious fleet switched targets to nearby Lucrehulks, now getting into firing range. The fighters of this attack force heavily targeted the weapons defense towers on the flagship, taking it out swiftly and rendering it pretty much defenseless, and no longer of any importance. The firefight inside the vessel continued, with Jedi troopers ferrying through the doors just beside Obi-Wan, and unloading at the destroyer droids before they could finish their transformations. Kenobi protected Qui-Gon from these attackers, before one of them told him that they were special forces. No need to be worried about them, kid. Qui-Gon pulled out his weapon as the troopers all saluted to him and prepped their demolition team. Surrounding the Jedi were a group of troopers. They kept an eye out for any other Federation toys. Once the charges were set, the door was blown through, and the few B-1s defending the bridge were taken out almost immediately. Qui-Gon took point with his apprentice right behind him. They quickly demanded for a fleet-wide surrender, or their ships would be destroyed. Newt Gunray looked to all the other men with him in the bridge, and tried to see if any of them would be just a little bit heroic to help him escape. Just outside, one of the many Lucrehulks was detonated, sending a fiery explosion through the air and debris into the sides of various vessels. It was an unintentional shock. The Jedi military wasn't really going for the kill, but one of their pilots was intercepted and shot through the hangar bay to avoid being killed. Their vessel was on fire, and she assumed that the donut ring around the Lucrehulk continued all the way through. Instead, she slammed into the reactor core and destroyed the vessel and herself. Gunray didn't know that, so he called for an all-out surrender, not believing how this could happen. The Jedi troopers, wearing symbols that looked similar to the Order's crest but not exactly, locked up the bridge and gave the clearance codes for the fleet to depart into hyperspace. From the control deck, they would shut down every single battle droid inside the vessel, before taking their gunships and thus departing. It was a clean and slick operation, performed as if it had been done 1,000 times before. Gunray felt some sense of relief in seeing the confusion from the Jedi apprentice, but it was still over for him. All the battle droids inside his flagship were shot down. The command bridge was under the control of the Jedi, and Gunray would answer for his attack on a sovereign Republic system. Before discussions could begin between Jyn and the Federation board, a transmission was sent to Chancellor Valorum's office. He and his loyal friend Palpatine were inside, discussing the ramifications of this attack on Naboo. Qui-Gon's hologram appeared, and he bowed respectfully to the two politicians, before informing the Supreme Chancellor that it was done. The Federation had been apprehended. They could be officially brought back to the discussion table. Gunray pleaded over the back of Qui-Gon's head before the transmission ended. Valorum would personally be coming out to Naboo to settle this thing once and for all. This, in all honesty, would be the perfect way for him to end his term as Chancellor. He was closing in on the last year of his time as a Chancellor, and a triumph like this would be remarkable for his legacy. Qui-Gon then sat everyone down, and told Nute Gunray that he would not speak about what he saw here today. The attack wasn't an attack, but a liberation. The Federation had once again gone too far, and it was time for them to be officially brought to justice. Jyn passed his student a cylindrical disc and told him to plug it into the motherboard, so Kenobi did. The Jedi Master was both threatening and warm to the captured Federation heads. He made his case extremely clear. Their blockade had been defeated by 2 Jedi, nothing more, nothing less. Any other such thoughts were delusions, such as Gunray's belief that he could exploit any sovereign system again. Obi-Wan asked his master what he needed to do with the disc, and Qui-Gon raised his hand, gesturing him to quiet his mind momentarily. He then told the Viceroy and his buddies that they could all make this a lot easier on themselves if they told him who they worked for, if anyone at all. They all denied working for or with anyone. All of their words were nothing but lies. It was clear too. Qui-Gon could see their unease at knowing that there was more at stake here. Frustratedly, Master Jyn agreed to leave them be until the Chancellor and his posse arrived. It didn't matter anyways. Their futures and their own independence as a mega corporation had all expired. Surely Valorum would seize this opportunity to make a permanent change for the Republic. One could only hope for a single voice to change all of bureaucracy, but Qui-Gon would not hold his breath. Master Jyn got to his feet and pulled the device from the drive, before telling Obi-Wan to hold on to it. He didn't know it yet, but the disc changed all the security information and recordings, tracked incoming transmissions as well as outgoing, and exposed the data inside the Federation drive, which this vessel was connected all the way back to the headquarters on Keda Nemodia. Obi-Wan had so many questions, but they would have to wait. Not only because the Chancellor was coming, but because no one could ever know about the Jedi private military. Not far from Naboo, a secret space station in the Rishi Maze guided every vessel back to port. Medical troops quickly exited from the station and got everyone who may have died or been wounded during the skirmish. This was the most effective military the galaxy had ever seen, operating both in complete secrecy away from the public eye and projecting the mindset of the Jedi Order. As the troops filed in, its commander got into contact with the High Council on Coruscant to inform them of the success at this operation. They thanked him, before asking for status on the Outer Rim sieges, which provided more answers. The history of the Jedi private military was not very long, but it was very bright. Founded in the middle of the conflict with the Nile some 200 years ago, it was brought together to protect the galaxy from external threats. In an era where the Jedi budget wasn't watched under a microscope by the Senate Spending Committee, the High Council commissioned a brand new military force, outfitted with an army, Marine Corps, and Navy. Several contacts inside the Jedi Order were used for this, and sworn into complete secrecy. Drive yards, industrial systems, and construction stations were all used to create vessels of war for the Jedi Order. Of course, there is a note about money, but we'll get to that. Within the conflict with the Nihil, a Jedi Navy was scrounged together and forced out. There were some initial successes, some heavy failures, and a lot of learning. What the High Council of the time recognized was the need for an active military, and thus, the Jedi heightened their recruitment quota, though this information wasn't privy to the rest of the Order. They believed it would damage their reputation outside, and their morality from the inside. The Order as a sect was in all essence a political body. Representing not just itself but the Republic was difficult, so they created a secret order to do what the Jedi really wanted to do, without the imagery of the Order being misconstrued by the public or anyone else. The Senate, nor its leadership, had any clue about this. Only the High Council and former members of its military knew about its purpose and its secrets. To fill the ranks of this secret military, the Jedi continued the recruitment tactics with 1 to 3-year-old children who showed the signs of using the Force, as they always did. It was the entire reason behind the enlargement in the Order over the past 2 centuries. The Jedi did not exploit, but because most of the students they brought in didn't meet their requirements, they were given choices. Traditionally, before the quota was enhanced, it was commonplace for rejected Jedi to serve inside the temple, regardless of their failure to meet Order standards. Typically, this went for students that struggled to keep up, individuals that showed signs of the Force early on but never connected, or students incapable of learning the curriculum. These reject Jedi were still a part of the wider Order family, and were permitted to work inside the temple. Those that maintained a loyalty to the Jedi and to the Force were permitted a chance to join this military. Of course, there were alternative methods too. The conflict with the Nihil left thousands of children without homes, families, or places to go. Instead of creating orphanages, the Jedi gave these children a home, and then a choice. They could continue in these established Jedi homes and be free, or they could join the secret military by choice. Most chose the latter, because they felt they had a duty to make sure no one else suffered the same agony they felt as orphans. Eventually, over the years, these Jedi-funded homes joined the military because it was tradition. The Council nor its military never forced members of these homes/orphanages into the military. It was only an honor tradition for those who did join. Most who really didn't want to joined because they didn't want to lose their friends, but they never would. This secret sect wasn't exactly like the Order either. They didn't follow the no attachment rule, so people with attachments were allowed to participate. So for someone like Qui-Gon, that leaves a question. How could Master Jin theoretically join this secret sect if no one knew about it aside from the High Council? Because surely, the Sith should have anticipated this attack if Dooku was a cohort of theirs. Well, Dooku didn't know either. Qui-Gon only found out because, at one point or another, he decided to join the Temple Guard unit. This military, like the Temple Guards, was completely secretive. Whenever someone joined either unit, like the Temple Guard unit, it was said that the individual went on a barash vow, simply to connect themselves and harmonize with the Force. This rule was created thousands of years before to protect those who wanted to join the Temple Guard unit. It kept any individual Temple Guard anonymous, and the secret army the same. Though there was a direct overlap between the guards and the military, because they were, technically, one and the same. Master Jin, as a Jedi Knight, found home here, and he excelled. During his mid-20s, he found the thrill of this line of work exhilarating. After he reached the age of 30, he decided he had enough. Like it is for Jedi that join the Temple Guard unit, they forget about what they know. The secret remains only in their head and in their heart. It's a personal choice, one that does not involve anyone else, meaning that, like Kenobi over Naboo, Dooku had no clue about Qui-Gon's involvement in this. Now, of course, because this is a secret military, the Jedi Council had a firm grip on end-to-end control over everything. In a way, it reflected the nature of the non-existent ISB. These Jedi were everywhere, and anyone who became a member was considered a Jedi. It was a high honor for civilians and orphans who never had anything but the Jedi Order to call their own. It wasn't just that either, but a pathway for normal citizens to get out into the world as accomplished people. Because there was this really big question of finances, and the Jedi desire to do right by the people of the galaxy with this secret. As was stated, with the military being started 200 years ago, it got most of its initial funding from the Order itself. Yet, there was the profit from actually fully defeating the Nihil. The Outer Rim was a gold mine, and while defeating an Outer Rim force like the Nihil wasn't a total capture of the Outer Rim, because there were other crime families, it came with credits. The Jedi as an organization or religion did not have the power to force the Republic to expand its borders. They tried several times and failed all of those times. So instead of getting the Republic to do something it clearly would not do, they pretty much created their own organized crime ring, without the crime. Again, in a manner similar to the would-be Empire, the Jedi took money straight out of the crime families' pockets and poured it into resources to help. Because once the Senate started to reduce the Jedi budget, the Jedi needed another outlet for funding. Of course, the Order did attempt to take territory in the Outer Rim and free it from the oppression of these syndicates, but that didn't last and it actually caused more harm than good. It was better for the Jedi to wage war and ship people into refugee zones, again created by the Jedi, than try and take territory and attempt to form a stratocratic government, which rarely worked. Now, the Jedi also embezzled credits out of corrupt local governments and into the pockets of the people and the Jedi's secret military. There was a big worry about greed from the High Council, but it never bubbled up to that point. The secret military wasn't even overfunded. It was a structure that did not rely on paychecks during service, but those credits were paid out big to individuals that retired after service in the military, individuals that did not come from the Order on Coruscant. It was a really tight ship that allocated resources everywhere. There were 11 different fleets, including the one that attacked the Federation, which was prepared by Qui-Gon Jinn prior to their arrival over Naboo. There were also well over 900,000 troopers in the galaxy. Again, most of these people were regular people that didn't show signs of the Force, so they were orphans turned military personnel. But it also should be said that with each military, there was a division of lightsaber-wielding troopers who did have the capability to use the Force to a lesser degree. That, though, all leads back to Senator Palpatine, who accompanied Valorum to Naboo. He was confused. Gunray was clearly out of his mind. He was constantly preaching about some sort of illegal military that attacked him and his fleet, one run by the Jedi. It was such a preposterous idea, even to Sidious. No one, not Plagueis, not Tenebras, nor anyone else ever knew the Jedi to be militant. All Palpatine saw on the outside was a complacent Order holding on to a dying flame. Sure, from the public perspective, it did look that way because of the treatment they received from the Senate, but on the inside, the Order was unmovable. There were always discussions within the ranks of the military about taking the fight to the Republic for always treating them so poorly, but these delusions were quickly put to sleep anytime they arose. Regardless, Valorum came to his conclusion and promised to bring the greatest punishment down on the Trade Federation. He did not care how powerful they looked militaristically. They were going to lose their business. All the assets would become nationalized and used for Republic defense from whatever is out there. Palpatine was surprised by this move, since Valorum had always been an idealist that happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. That was his greatest strategy. Politically, Valorum was actually quite aggressive against the conglomerates. The Federation blockade only ever happened because of a new tax code he put on the hyperspace lanes used by the megacorporations. But now, Valorum had power and proof. The TF was deep in the pockets of the Corps and in the Senate. However, blood was in the water. Everyone could see it now, and Valorum was catching stride with that same move. If they sided with the business sect, they'd probably be seen as conspirators against the Republic, individuals that needed to lose their public servant positions for more constituent-focused politicians. Valorum was cleaning house, forcing Sidious to turn to his 3 allies. Tyrannus had removed Kamino from the archives and was set to abandon the Jedi Order. Maul, on the other hand, was finally ready for missions. His training as an assassin was pretty much complete. He'd be sent out to discover this threat spoken about by Gunray and expose it. Plagueis would actually be joining Maul on this mission. The actual Sith Lord had been in the lab too frequently as of recent, and wanted to free his mind from his studies. This would be a weird pairing since they didn't frequently interact, but Plagueis needed it for himself. Plus, if the Federation could be swept off their feet so easily, then something was truly afoot. On Coruscant, as discussions started to pick up around the dismantling of the Trade Federation and the prison sentences for the perpetrators and Gunray loyalists, Kenobi had a question. He followed his master around the temple, as he asked to know what that was all about. Qui-Gon didn't say anything, and he continued to act like there was nothing to be said, until finally, he sat Obi-Wan down and explained that the Jedi Order and the galaxy were condensed so that it could be better understood, but there were secrets far greater than anyone could conceptualize, so that people could rest easily. He told Obi-Wan to leave it at that, to which his Padawan nodded and bowed before leaving. Master Jin returned to his quarters and opened up a private communication line to report on everything he saw in the file. Everything that had transpired was a long-in-the-works plan. While Qui-Gon was not a member of their secret society anymore, he was well aware of their hit list. Master Jin was a ranked officer during his time, a very talented militant, despite his contempt for combat. As an individual with hierarchy in their ranks, he was a part of a century-old plot to take down the Trade Federation. There was a reason for the relative ease they had when taking down the shields. They weren't just using heavily modified shielded Mon Calamari cruisers, but they had designed the most capable ion cannons in the history of the galaxy. Despite being war machines, they weren't being used for exclusive combat. Most of the time, the Jedi used these ships to transport supplies, because after all, Mon Calamari cruisers were just that, trade ships. Sure, there were rumors about these fleets and armies, but there wasn't widespread information about them. Not until today, the same day that all the information Qui-Gon found about the Federation returned to the private military. Outrage covered the Galactic Republic, as Valorum, foolishly, informed the public that an unknown military operation liberated the people over Naboo. Maybe he was stupid or naive, but Valorum wanted to make sure his population was well informed, and instead, he created a mass panic. Everyone knew the Federation had top-of-the-line vessels, so the fact that a single fleet took down one of the Lucrehulks and captured another, without losing a life, apparently, was huge news. Valorum tried to ease the rising tension by promising security with the Trade Federation military under Republic jurisdiction. That also did not alleviate a whole lot of people though. This was the first time the Jedi private army had come under fire or even acknowledgement from a reputable source. No one cared if the Black Suns or Zygerians were crying about massive vessels threatening their borders, but the Republic, that was a different story. On the Sith side of things, Maul and Plagueis were getting absolutely nowhere. They weren't on a trail or anything. They tried to find this mysterious fleet but found nothing. The Sith had various contacts in the Outer Rim that they tried getting answers from, but no one spoke up. This wasn't just terror, but power. The Jedi ran such a tight ship that the most powerful crime lords in the galaxy feared even speaking of them. Of course, it would be more beneficial if the Jedi could take their influence too. That, though, was the beauty of the system they set up. By embezzling the crime families and rerouting all finance to people who actually needed it, the criminals in charge were really just figureheads trapped inside their own territory. They all believed that if they spoke out, then they would lose their influence, when in reality, the Jedi kind of needed them to have quote-unquote influence. It was a tough line for the Jedi to walk, because they wanted to just clear everything up, but the Republic wasn't going to help them do that. Had the Jedi assembled this military to such a strength as it was now a century before, this might be a completely different story. It just took them 200 years to reach this amount of actual military power, and it happened to reach its peak when the Republic was at its weakest point. Despite the Sith not finding anything, especially from Maul and Plagueis' mission, the Jedi were well aware of their movement in some way. Even though the Jedi had an unbreakable leash around the leaders in the Outer Rim, they never crossed paths with the Sith. Their ancient rival was nothing but a figment of their imagination, a dead history not gonna return. This wasn't even brilliance on the Sith part, or slacking from the Jedi part. No one had ever been trained to keep an eye out for Bainite-era Sith. So sure, troopers and Sith may have crossed paths before, never in battle, but they never would have thought anything of the other. If anything, the Jedi looked like a private security force, which was not uncommon in the Outer Rim. Their logos were Jedi-related, but not affiliated with the Order, whereas the Sith positioned themselves as powerful bankers, oligarchs, or simply no-names in a sea of quadrillions of lives. Palpatine and Dooku, though, were also looking for answers, just like their allies. The field mission wasn't nearly as progressive as the one in-house. Palpatine, due to his position as Valorum's right-hand man, had more information, yet none of it pointed towards a verifiable source. Dooku knew nothing about the Jedi military, and thus everything came to a standstill. The public outrage hopefully would help them find this advanced military fighting force. Not far from Plagueis and Maul, they watched Jedi troopers touch down on the surface of the planet they were on. Maul wanted to engage to prove himself to Plagueis, but instead they watched. Dozens of slavers scattered at the sight of this military. With his viewfinders, Plagueis looked into space for the fleet and saw nothing. These militants arrived without a fighting fleet. That's how confident they were. They were simply here to clean up a bundle of slavers that were quietly working for one of the Pike princes. It was weird. They simply landed, fired at the slavers, and chased down any survivors, while a select group faced off with the prince. Plagueis told Maul to wait with the ship, which the assassin didn't want to do, but he listened anyways. Plagueis quietly would watch the Jedi warriors surround the Pike man, aiming their weapons at him. He, in an instant, would give up his data cylinders, all of which providing the profits he made from the enslavement. Plagueis turned to see a dozen of these troopers helping the slaves into their gunships, before the sound of a lightsaber shrieked through the air. He turned, curious to see if the Jedi had caught on to this militant group too, but no, it was Maul. He'd been surprised by a trio of troopers, all of them thinking he was one of the slavers. His saber slashed through their bodies, dropping them all in one go, as a few other troopers fired at him. Plagueis raised a hood over his head and ran across a tree line in broad daylight. A few of the troops took shots at him, as Maul flung his lightsaber to defend himself, deflecting shots back at the militants. Some of them fell, others did not. More reinforcements came around and clipped Plagueis in the spine. He twisted his saber around, and with the turn of his head, a body cam revealed the face of Hego Damas II. The Sith Lord didn't see the cam, nor realize he was visible even with his hood on. His saber blocked shots before shoving Maul into the vessel and falling to his knees. Maul took off and quickly departed into hyperspace, leaving the Pike Prince behind. Plagueis would be alright, but the Jedi troopers needed to report to the High Council. The Sith had returned. Thanks to the long-established relationship with the private military and the recorded footage, the Council believed that the Sith had returned. Luckily, they knew exactly what they were looking for: a Dathomiri Zabrak and a Mun banker named Hego Damas II. Even though the Jedi had this information, they did not go for the kill yet. If the Sith were truly back, then killing them immediately would not ensure they stayed dead, like they didn't this time. Hego was the main target. Everything he had a connection to needed to be studied, monitored, and tracked. Investigators inside the military were already looking at popular business relationships, celebrities who frequently interacted with the banker, and of course politicians that were on his payroll. The files on Hego Damas went deep, and the Jedi worked overtime to get them to a point where they could be released to the High Council, so the Order could make an official move. The Council was eager to deal with this problem, but they turned their attention back to the Republic, because of Valorum's decision to mobilize the Federation military as his own. Turns out there was severe pushback from the Techno-Union and banking clans. They decided that they would threaten the Republic by tightening the leash around the government credit line to force them to bend or break. The Chancellor took this quite personally and decided to begin waging war against the clans and take control over the credit lines and completely nationalize it with the Techno-Union. Was it the right move? Maybe, but the Jedi weren't in favor of war. They couldn't also exactly go and fight the Republic though. Plus, not for nothing, this is kind of what the Jedi were hoping for, just without the bloodshed of actual combat. However, it was brought up to the High Council that there might not be actual conflict. This was clearly an attempt by the Jedi to crush two birds with one stone, because the Techno-Union and banking clans were right behind the Federation in concern for them. This challenge from the Republic could see all the major conglomerates falling out of power, and influence overnight going into Valorum's hands. He could crash the economy, or he could use emergency powers, give himself more time, and nationalize all the conglomerates and leave pretty much as a hero. The Jedi were more concerned with the Sith, and the Council vetoed any move to mobilize their navy despite the Republic move. The only concern was that the Republic might get too corrupt with such a sizable force. Eyes from the private military of the Order would keep up with the Sith investigation, while all eyes would remain on the Republic, with two major Jedi fleets ready for activation in surrounding locations if need be. Instead of chaos, the banking clans backed down, and the Jedi turned their full undivided attention towards the Sith. Quietly, Jedi were infiltrating close political allies of the Sith banker. All of the individuals reported on his files were a part of a coalition created to hold the government for ransom. At least that's what the Jedi thought. The Jedi were not privy to the plans to completely take over the government, so it was assumed that Palpatine and Hago were part of some great plan to expose the corruption of the Republic and send the population into chaos. They did not believe the Sith were as cunning as their ancient counterparts once were. The Jedi may have gotten a lot right, but what the Sith were up to certainly was not. Once all the close allies of the banker were identified, marked, and even investigated, the list shrunk down to 3 known names, with a hidden identity. Maul was unaccounted for, the unknown identity, but Dooku, Hago, and Palpatine were all closely affiliated with the Sith. Something was in the works, and in an attempt to group them all up and deal with them at once, the Jedi tracked them and their movements every day for the span of a month. Frequent locations, daily habits, everything. With Valorum holding emergency power to nationalize every major conglomerate and remove their representative influence from inside the government, Palpatine was stuck sitting as Chancellor. The Sith were no longer concerned about the Jedi, or this mysterious military they saw with the Pike Prince. They were still investigating, but nothing came through. Dooku tried to get Qui-Gon to join the Sith, and he refused. It wasn't flat out, hey, join the Sith, but Qui-Gon rejected, which is the main point. The Sith were now coming to a conclusion that they needed to plan an assassination on Valorum. He needed to be out of their way. Following a long drawn-out discussion during the day with the Chancellor, Palpatine returned to the works, where Dooku and Plagueis were already waiting. All of their plans were falling apart on them. The Clone Wars didn't even seem feasible, so much so that Plagueis stopped Palpatine from starting the cloning process just in case Valorum's crackdown on businesses went too far and exposed them. The Sith Lord was growing impatient with this plan, resulting in an argument from his student. Palpatine believed in their cause, and how they could manipulate the Senate into their power, make Dooku the Senator of Sereno, force the vote once Valorum died, and he could become Chancellor with the executive powers because of the external threats. Dooku nodded his head, agreeing, turning to Maul, who stood there quietly. He didn't have anything to add. But he did notice something. There was a slight buzzing from afar that sat just beneath the voices of the Elder Sith as they continued to bicker. Plagueis frustratedly proclaimed that the Republic needed to crumble, and making him Chancellor would be counterproductive because everything was at stake now. Once Maul reached the exit, he saw something glimmering back into his eye, a reflection from a star cruiser, blinding him for just a moment. He turned back towards the skies trying to identify the vessel, before recognizing the color pattern, the same from the Pikes. Maul yelled at the other Sith. Once his eyes turned back to the other 3 Sith, the blur in his eyes turned to darkness. He and the other 3 were killed in one explosion. The Jedi cruiser unloaded several turbo rounds into the structure. The entire building crumbled, ending the lineage of the Sith in one blast. Just like at every other site of conflict, the Jedi deployed dozens of forces, including 3 counselors to investigate the wreckage. The remnants of the Sith would be a couple of limbs, some broken sabers, and destroyed holocrons. It was a moment of triumph, but a sign that the Jedi needed to do more to keep the Sith away from the galaxy. The next 3 years, as a result of this, would see the Jedi Order visiting several ancient Sith locations and ceremonially burning down their temples and places of practice. The Sith Empire of old needed to be gone. While the plans of the current Sith never came to fruition or even made it to Jedi intelligence, the worry of its possibilities were more concerning for many Jedi. The Sith might be gone, but their stench remained. The private military remained a threat in the minds of many Republic citizens and representatives. Once Valorum stepped down, no one knew what to do, so a massive navy by the Republic was constructed to both boost jobs and also get recruitment numbers up in case this military returned. The Republic became paranoid about an incident from a blockade that didn't really need to even happen. Valorum from afar coached several chancellors, making each of them pretty much successors of his administration. It was a positive thing though. Most of the change that came at the end of his term truly changed the dynamic the Jedi had with the rest of the galaxy. The paranoia over a mysterious navy and army forced the Republic in the coming few terms to seek out conflict with the Outer Rim. And sure, this did result in proper violence with the crime families, but it also meant that the Republic had to start caring about citizens in the Outer Rim to stop mysterious fleets from coming out of nowhere. People in the Outer Rim knew of this military, quote-unquote, but the Order continued to remain on top of its activity, so no one knew who funded it. They avoided the Republic at every turn once they arrived, making the paranoia seem even more crazed. But ironically, because the Jedi saved Naboo from an overwhelming blockade, they forced the Republic to act out of pure fear. The Jedi military would continue to grow, while remaining completely out of sight from the Republic. Qui-Gon would eventually learn the truth about the reason Dooku died, and he would be disappointed. But he wouldn't be unhappy. If his master had fallen down the dark path, then it was only a matter of time in his eyes. Outside of Master Jim, the Jedi Order maintained its secret and private military force. They chose to keep it secretive, because despite it not doing a ton of work on the grand scale, it was imperative to forcing the Republic into changing itself. With expansion from the Republic, the Jedi military eventually stopped growing and stagnated, but it never would disappear. It was their way to provide to the galaxy from the shadows, to protect quadrillions of souls from threats they never needed to worry about, whether that be the Sith now, or Abeloth later, or even perhaps out-of-galaxy threats beyond that. The Jedi were there, always watching, so that balance could remain forever in the Force. And that, my friends, is our mysterious story. Special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about it. I really wanted to build this Jedi private military out of a battle. I really wanted it to be set up from like, oh, this is like legit, and then following that, you get the explanation. I really wanted this Jedi military to be kind of just an existential threat to the galaxy. And it's not really a threat, like obviously they're not going to go crazy, but like the Jedi designed this military to take down threats from the inside out. So they were already waiting for the Federation to expose itself. They just needed something that would publicly make the Federation look like the criminals they knew they were. And so the way this military kind of works is like they constantly look for the threat. And the threat at the moment was the Federation, but you know, if Palpatine rose to power, then he would become that next threat. This military is really meant to emulate the ISB in a way, and that's why I specifically said it within the story, is that it's meant to really look like the ISB, to kind of function like it, kind of like a secret society. I had a funny moment when I finished writing this, and I realized that I kind of turned the Jedi into like the deep state. And that's kind of what they are. They're just lurking everywhere. But on the surface, outside for everyone to see them, they still look like the Jedi Order, and this really is their way to both protect people that are orphans, and people that grow up, without stability around them, while also giving them either the chance to join the military or to branch out and have their own families, all while maintaining the operation of the Jedi Order politically. I go into this in quite a bit of stories, but the Jedi Order is a really political body, kind of like the Vatican traditionally. With that imagery of being this religious sect, the Jedi can't exactly do what they want to do. So having a military out in the open would make them look as hyper-aggressive. But if they have a military in secrecy that goes around like black ops and takes out the crime families or embezzles funds from them and gives them back to people, then they can be what they want to be without disturbing how the public perceives them. I don't really think Qui-Gon would join a military force, which is why I kind of like the idea of him going, like being so in love with the Jedi Order that he goes to be a temple guard and accidentally ends up in the Secret Service, but decides to leave it so he could train a Jedi and become, Obi-Wan's master before this video even starts. So I hope you all enjoyed this story. It's a little bit different, but I kind of like doing stuff with the Jedi like this. I've got a Death Star concept I'll put on screen right here. So, got more Jedi ideas, put them down below. I do, read all the comments. So I love you all, spread the love, and always, my friends, may the Force be with you.